have your Bibles, we are going to be in Hebrews chapter 11 again. You notice that things have really slowed down. And that's very intentional, as I wanted to spend a whole lot of time talking about the Christian concept of faith. And we have such a wonderful opportunity to examine the concept of faith here in chapter 11, which is all about faith. That really simple yet profound definition there in verse 1 is this. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And so what we learn about faith right out of the gates is that as Christians who live by faith, we are to find our identity in heavenly realities. We find the direction that we should head in life based on that which is unseen, a belief in a creator that made all of this and has a purpose behind all of this. This is how God's people have always lived. This is how it's always been. This has always been the way of life, and this has always been the way of life that has made us pleasing to God. If you remember the second verse there in Hebrews 11 says, the people of old received, this is how the people of old received their commendation. It was by faith. And so after this quick definition of faith, what Hebrews chapter 11 does is it starts to go through a who's who of God's people in the Old Testament so that we can look at their lives, or in this case, remember their lives, right? Because this was written to Jews who would have known these names, would have known their stories by heart. And he's bringing it to their attention so he can say, this is what faith looked like. Remember Abel? That's what faith is. Someone who lived with an understanding that there needs to be atonement for sin and therefore lived sacrificially to honor God with their life. And as a result, Abel even honored God with his death. That's what faith looks like. That's what having faith is. See, that's the approach that this chapter is taking. And then he goes from Abel right to Enoch. And for those of us, or for us, we're like, Enoch who? Wait, who's Enoch again? Enoch is just very briefly mentioned in the Old Testament, but he's mentioned as one who walks with God. That's what faith looks like. Someone who walks with God, who lives with an awareness of this relationship that we have with our Creator. And there is intimacy there in that we are walking together, and that means walking the way God wants us to walk, walking in holiness. That means something specific. That's what living by faith is. This is what faith looks like. And of course, the author of Hebrews wants us to understand what faith looks like so that we can find assurance in being able to identify faith when we see it. When we see it in the lives of those who live around us and when we see it in our own lives. We want to be able to see that faith play out in our lives as a Christian community, and we find assurance there and hope there. And so now he moves from Abel to Enoch to Noah. Unlike Enoch, we all know about Noah. Everybody's heard of Noah. We know about Noah. But I'll admit, I'm overwhelmed to preach a sermon about Noah. I mean, there are so many angles to this story that we're told in the book of Genesis about the life of Noah that it's overwhelming. And people tend to want to discuss apologetic answers whenever they discuss the story of Noah, because we have a ton of questions as to how all that played out, right? When we think of Noah and the ark, we can think of 1,000 questions immediately. How did that all work? A global flood and a man and his family, 8 individuals, get on this ark with all of these animals. How did that work? How did he even have the technology to build such an ark? They were only 10 generations removed from Adam and Eve. How were they even capable of creating an ark? And then if they did build this ark, how in the world would it float? And if they did build this giant ark and it could float, how did all the animals get on there? And even if it did float, and even if they did build the ark and all the animals got on there, how would they all survive? How did they make it? They were on this ark for a year. We can think of 1,000,000 questions like these, and there is a great merit in looking for answers for those questions. I think it's worthwhile, and I think it's a fascinating discussion, but there's obviously no way I can tackle all of those questions in one sermon, but Christians have been answering those questions for centuries. But we need to remember something anytime we're talking about a miraculous event in the Bible. When you're talking about a miraculous event such as Noah and the ark, we have to, I caution everyone in trying to find plausible explanations for impressive, miraculous events, right? That's kind of a fruitless endeavor just by definition of what a miracle is, right? So one miracle can never seem more doable than another miracle because they're miracles, right? Does that make sense? So like if you're trying to look for a natural explanation for that which is supernatural, you're not going to be able to do it. And so with man, there are many things that are impossible, right? We know this. Just like Jesus said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Why? Well, because when we're talking about man and what man can do, we're talking about how things naturally play out. When we're talking about God, our creator, we're talking about that which is supernatural. And so it doesn't make any sense to think that turning water into wine is more doable than raising Lazarus from the dead. That doesn't make any sense to think that because we're not talking about tricks. We're talking about miracles, right? So we're talking about something that naturally is impossible. And so keep those things in mind anytime you're starting out into the Bible, especially in Genesis where there's so many big, impressive, miraculous moments, right? I mean, creation, that was pretty impressive. Creation, that was a pretty big miracle. Something out of nothing. There was a creator behind all of this. That is an impressive miracle. And again, it can be fascinating and worthwhile, and there is merit to researching natural causes that were encompassed in this idea of creation, right? I mean, that's worthwhile to examine old rocks and the age of the universe and things like that, and looking at all of creation. There's a lot of merit to that, but we're talking about a belief in a creator here. So at the end of the day, we're going to come to a roadblock as far as natural explanations go, because we believe in a creator. We believe in something beyond that which is natural. So remember that when you're reading through Genesis. You get to the Garden of Eden, I have 1,000 questions about the Garden of Eden, how things worked out there. I really want to know. I can't wait to get more answers about the Garden of Eden. And then you keep reading in Genesis, you get to the 7 generations of people that we talked about last time, leading up to Enoch. They were living to like 1,000 years old. I got questions about that. And there's a lot of answers to explore and to think about. And so when you get to Noah and the ark, and we're going to read Hebrews 11, verse 7, and that encompasses like 3 or 4 chapters in Genesis. He's just making a reference that is a reference to a lot of information back in Genesis. We have to remember that it's worthwhile to look for these natural explanations. And I've watched hour-long documentaries on whether or not the ark could float. I watched hour-long documentaries, just about the archaeological data that we have to prove that there was a worldwide flood. I mean, again, all of these things are worthwhile to think about, but we are talking about a miracle here, a miraculous event. And so, since we are studying the life of Noah through the lens of Hebrews, we're going to focus on that which Hebrews focuses on, and that is his faith. The book of Hebrews wants us to think about Noah with regard to his faith and how that looked for a man like Noah to live by faith so that we can identify faith and so that we can live out our faith like men like Noah. And so I'm not going to be talking today about how the animals lined up 2 by 2, but we're going to be talking about Noah's faith. Although I did see a really great meme recently. It was a motivational meme, and it said, "Hey, you need to attack today like you're the 3rd lion in line to get on the ark, and it's starting to rain." I thought that was pretty good. But anyways, let's get into Hebrews chapter 11, and we'll start and end at verse 7. Here is this quick summarization of the life of Noah so that we can analyze his faith. It says, by faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear, constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. So the first thing we have to consider when it comes to the life of Noah, living by faith for a guy like Noah, that meant living with this understanding of what God really felt about sin. God will not tolerate sin forever. God hates sin. And so he made that very clear to Noah, who had a relationship with him, who walked with God. And he warned Noah. He was warned by God, and he was warned about the coming judgment. And he was warned about the coming judgment because of how sinful this world was. See how those ideas go hand in hand. We have to understand that God will not tolerate sin, does not like sin, he hates sin, and he's going to do something about it. That understanding goes hand in hand with someone who lives by faith. And we tend to think that we live in the worst time ever, where there's more sin than ever. And you, depending on what angle you take, I suppose you could say, well, there's more people in the world today, therefore there's more sin in the world today. But everybody always thinks that, generation to generation, we live in the worst time ever. I just bet you, like living in the midst of like World War II, you were probably saying, oh, this is the worst time. It's done. Jesus is going to come back soon now, right? I mean, we always live, because we have this awareness. When you live by faith, you have this awareness of sin, and you know that God hates sin, and he will judge sin. And so you do live with this awareness when you live by faith that God will judge the world. But Noah lived in an awful time. We tend to think that we live in an awful time. Noah lived in a horrible time. Remember, we're only like 10 generations removed from Adam and Eve, but in Genesis chapter 6, it says this: the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So we think it's bad now. In the days of Noah, people were continuously thinking evil thoughts 24/7. And it all happened just in 10 generations. We get to the point in which everyone is thinking evil all the time. That's how sin works. It always snowballs. It's how it works in our own lives, right? We think, well, that one little sin, we think of that one sin Adam and Eve committed in the garden. And then it snowballed, didn't it? We tend to justify those small sins in our life. Well, it's just one sin. It's not the end of the world. Well, that one sin literally resulted in like the end of the world. We get 10 generations removed from Adam and Eve in the garden, and there is going to be a catastrophic flood to wipe out people on the earth. In Genesis chapter 6, I'll keep reading, if I can turn there. In Genesis chapter 6, this is the Lord speaking. He says, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Well, how did this one guy find favor in the eyes of the Lord? What was he doing? Well, what pleased God about Noah was that Noah had faith. He walked with God, it tells us in Genesis chapter 6. He had this relationship, and with that relationship with God, as I mentioned earlier, he had an awareness of God's feelings toward sin. And God warned him that judgment was coming. And so this is, when it comes to the faith of Noah, faith is the conviction of things unseen, right? And so the things unseen in the life of Noah were the events as yet unseen, as it mentions there. That is God's coming wrath upon sin. We still need to live with this belief. This is still how faith works today. We still believe in the coming judgment of God. And for the life of Noah, you think about this warning of coming judgment via flood. It was beyond anything Noah could comprehend. This was beyond anything that he had ever experienced in his entire life. A global flood. He didn't have a category for this. And again, we too live with this kind of faith today. Living by faith now is just like then. The coming judgment of God is beyond anything we can possibly comprehend. It's beyond anything we've ever experienced or anyone has ever experienced, this coming judgment of God, but we are to live with this belief. And I'm glad we live with this belief that God punishes sin. And let me tell you why. I mean, this world is so broken and messed up, and it's so full of sin and wrongdoing. Like, if I had to believe that all of that wrongdoing was going to ultimately go unchecked, what a pitiful existence this would be. If at the end of the day, everyone sinned and this world was full of sin and everyone just gets away with it and you die and that's it, man, that's depressing, right? But we have this inner desire. I think all humans have this inner desire for justice. That's the part of us that's made in the image of God. We desire justice because our Creator is a just God. He demands justice, and He will ultimately deliver justice. No wrongdoing will ever go unpunished. No one will get away with it. Sin will be punished. And on this side of that coming wrath, we strive for justice. We want justice. We preach justice, but we don't fully get that justice. It feels like the people who carry out this sin, it feels like it just ultimately that they just get away with it. Under the sun justice. We remember when we were studying in the book of Ecclesiastes, it talked about justice. Under the sun justice is just not as fulfilling and as satisfying as what we ever want it to be. Because even when the bad guy gets caught and put in jail, he still did it, right? It's still done. So under the sun justice, or this pre-coming wrath of God judgment, it'll never fully be satisfying to us, but when God comes in wrath, He will eliminate sin. He won't just punish sin, He will eliminate it. It will be forever vanquished. It will be gone forever. And so living by faith is living with that belief right now and having it determine the direction of our lives, how we live, and the choices that we make. We find our identity knowing that God will make things right one day and no one's going to get away with it. And it's a comforting belief. But that's a hard belief to live with when you don't see the judgment each and every day, right? When you wake up another day and the judgment still hasn't come, and then the day after that you wake up and you live by faith, but the judgment still hasn't come. And tomorrow the sun will come up again and, well, maybe we start to think, well, it's likely that judgment is never going to come. But we live with the hope that it will come. And when you look at the life of Noah, we get this great example of living with this conviction and how it affects your life. He was a man who woke up day after day and judgment wasn't here yet he still lived by faith and it affected how he lived. He trusted God despite that. He kept obeying God despite that. He kept enduring in his relationship with God for 120 years. Noah got this message from God that he was going to judge the world with a catastrophic flood, and he started working on this ark as instructed by God, and 120 years go by. 120 years of getting up day after day. I'm going to trust again today. I'm going to obey again today. I'm going to endure again today because my identity is wrapped up in that which is not seen. The direction I head in life is wrapped up in who God is and what He feels about sin and what He's going to do about wrongdoings. And so in the life of Noah, living by faith means he got to work, because faith and works always go hand in hand. We are not saved by works. We are saved by faith and faith alone, but faith is never alone. If you have faith, it will result in works, right? Because of the beliefs that you have, that what this faith is wrapped up in. And so when we describe someone as faithful, we're referring to the things that they do, right? When we say, man, that dude is so faithful, or she is so faithful, we are referring to the works and the fruit that are evident in their lives. That's why we call someone faithful. I can see their faith because of the things that they do and how they live. And that's why we describe people as faithful. I think about I think about, he's gone on to be with the Lord now, but I think about Leland Lemon, which some of you know. He was my neighbor when I lived in Williamstown. He went to First Baptist. And that dude, like, he was just like clockwork. I mean, he just serving at the church, and he would always be the guy who like unlock the doors or like make the coffee and he'd run the sound. The funniest thing about Leland running sound is he couldn't hear. But he was always there and always ready to run it. I love that dude to death. And he was a great neighbor to have when I lived in Williamstown. If something broke, he would be there to help fix it. And he was awesome. But man, he was faithful because he was so consistent. Just like every time the doors were open to the church, he was there serving in some way, shape, or form. You never had to tell him to do anything. You never had to ask him to do anything. He was already doing it. It was just part of who he was. And so when we see people like that are consistent, that trust and obey and endure every single day, we describe them as faithful people. This was Noah. Noah was a faithful person. He just kept working on that ark every single day. And when he was 600 years old, the flood finally came after 120 years of working. Now consider the people he lived around. Remember how they are described in Genesis 6? They were described as people who thought evil and carried out evil continuously. You better believe he was mocked through that time. People were living through that life without those beliefs, and when they were seeing his faith play out, they obviously would ridicule that faith. And I imagine that ark stuck out like a sore thumb. I mean, we think of things that stick out like a sore thumb. A few weeks ago, because of traffic, I was on my way back from Columbus, and I couldn't get on 70, and so I was on the highway that runs parallel to 70, but it's like north of it, in between Columbus and Zanesville, and I forget the name of that highway. But I had never been on that highway before, and I saw something I had never seen and didn't even know existed. I'm driving along, and I see a building in the shape of a Longaberger basket. Have you seen this building? So, like, I mean, I didn't know this existed. It looks abandoned, but I'm driving down the road, and I'm like, what? That is a Longaberger basket? That's like a 7-story building or something. It's the most ridiculous sight ever. I'm laughing. I'm literally trying to video it as I'm driving, and you're supposed to do that. But I was like, there's a giant basket on the side of the road, and it's a building. So I'm trying to get video of this basket so I can show my family when I get home. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Think how ridiculous that must have been when they were building a giant basket as a building. Like the people driving by there, and some of you that have lived your whole lives in this area, you probably remember when they were building that building, and it was probably a spectacle. I don't know that, but I just bet you it was. You're driving along, and what are they building over there? That's a giant basket. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And of course, Longaberger basket was likely laughing all the way to the bank, right? Because they figured out how to sell baskets for like $200 a piece. So who's laughing? When people manage to find a marketing scheme like that, I'm just like, you did it. You sold a basket for $300, man. Wow. I wish I was as smart as you. But I imagine the building of the ark. I'm so sorry. Like, there's probably like 50 people right. I have Longaberger baskets at home. Like, you're mad right now. You're fuming. I just trashed your baskets. I'm sorry. Baskets are cool. If your basket's worth $300, hey, if you say so. Only if someone pays for it. Oh, man. Okay, I got to stop talking about baskets. But I just imagine, when Noah's building this gigantic ark, like it's stuck out like a sore thumb. What do you do? What are you building? You're building this giant floating box. Remember, it's not a boat. It's an ark. And so if it was a boat, it would be so easy to ridicule because back then you would be like, why are you building this on land? How are you going to get that thing to the water, right? That thing's too big to move. And of course, they would have seen some very obvious things like there's no rudder. There's no sail. You have no intentions of even steering this thing. What are you doing with your life? You're building a giant ark for what? It's ridiculous on all accounts without faith. And so much of what we do, so much of how we live as Christians, it makes no sense to those who don't believe in God. So much of how we live and how we utilize our money, our time, the goals we make in life, how we identify and how we find direction in life, that's folly to a non-believer. It's easy to ridicule, right? Without a belief in God, it's so easy to ridicule. And then not to mention that, the very existence of the ark would have made people mad, just like the very existence of your faith makes people mad. And I'll tell you why. It's offensive. What we believe is offensive. It is. There's no way around it. There's absolutely no way around the truth that the Christian faith is offensive to those who aren't Christian. Right? I mean, the very existence of the ark had to be offensive to those around Noah. Hey, Noah, so why are you building this giant floating box? Oh, I'm glad you asked. God is so tired of all of the sin in the world, and you all think about evil continuously, and you carry out sin. It's just so awful. He regrets having even made you, and so he's going to flood the entire world, except for those of us who believe in the one path of salvation here through this ark, which is so far me and my family, and that's it. That probably didn't go over well, right? I mean, it's offensive, believing in worldwide judgment. I mean, a future scene of wrath. That's what we, this is another interesting thing. When we go to the nursery in the church, or whenever you paint your nursery at home for your kids, we do Noah in the Ark, man. We get Noah in the Ark decals. And we see the picture of, it's like the family photo of Noah with the rhinos and it's always African animals. They got the best animals. And so it's like this family photo and it's all happy and the rainbow's there and it's great. And I'm always tempted, like, I'm just mean. Every time I always want to paint like little dead bodies floating in the background. It's a scene of wrath. It is a scene of wrath. Yes, there is the aspect of the Noah and the ark that is salvation, but we need more floating animal carcasses and stuff if we want to be true to the story that we read in the actual Bible, right? It's a scene of wrath. Don't do that to your kids and traumatize them. That is not an idea that's worthwhile. But still, believing what we believe, it's offensive to the world. We think of Paul informing Christians, hey, please know that what you believe is offensive. Just, you got to know that. He says, for the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. And so ridicule towards the Christian faith often sounds like this. You think I'm going to hell? Right? That's how we can be approached, to put us in a checkmate judgmental position. You believe I'm going to hell because I don't believe? You think I'm terrible? You think I'm sinful? That is the posture that a lot of people take towards Christians and our faith because we believe in eternal condemnation. We believe in the coming wrath of God. And of course, they always so conveniently leave out the fact that that's not the whole story, right? That's not the whole gospel message. Yes, there will be wrath upon sin, but we deserve it too. We deserve condemnation. Every Christian believes that we deserve God's wrath. We have earned the wrath of God. You think I'm terrible? You think I'm sinful? Yeah, I think I am too. I think we all are. We all are we were born under the curse of sin. We can't help but sin. No one has to teach anyone to sin. We sin naturally. That's who we are. That's what we do. But we believe we have salvation. And our salvation is Jesus Christ. Jesus is our ark. That is our path of salvation. So we don't ever want to downplay the coming wrath of God upon sin just to appear nice, because it's not nice. You know, we know it. We know that's not nice because we know God's wrath is a truth that accompanies the gospel message, and it's not nice to not warn someone of coming wrath when their soul is in danger, right? So we have entire denominations today that have abandoned the biblical message of God's judgment upon sin in the name of being nice. They will say, well, I want to love like Jesus. So they want to sound nice and ignore what the Christ himself taught. Right? We know that is not nice. It's a false facade, and it's an appearance of niceness that is actually cruel and dishonest and mean, but it's with a smile, right? When Jesus taught about the coming wrath of God, when he taught about faith, he even references Noah specifically. He wants us to know that the coming wrath of God is just like the days of Noah. When Jesus taught about faith, when Jesus taught about judgment, when Jesus taught about wrath, he referenced Noah too. Hey, remember the days of Noah, the catastrophic worldwide flood? Think about that when you're trying to wrap your mind around the coming judgment of God upon sin. Think about that. I want to read it to you in Matthew 24. We studied it back when we were going verse by verse through Matthew. It just doesn't make any sense to call yourself a Christian and ignore the words of the Christ. It doesn't make any sense to say, well, we just need to love like Jesus and then ignore the coming judgment of God. Because if you ignore the coming judgment of God, you're not loving like Jesus. You don't love like Jesus loved if you ignore how God feels about sin. Listen to what he says. This is when Jesus is talking about the coming wrath of God. He says, "But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away, so will be the coming of the Son of Man." That's a message of love. It's warning people of the coming danger of God's judgment upon sin. He was teaching about salvation. Teaching about salvation from sin, that's loving like Jesus. That's what Jesus taught. It's pretty cut and dry, isn't it? I mean, how he taught. It's as in the days of Noah. And so Noah preached through word and deed for 120 years. There were scoffers through that time who would probably refer to Noah as a Looney Tune, and then when judgment came, it caught them off guard. They were not ready. It came to them suddenly. When we think of Noah working for 120 years, you know it didn't come to him suddenly. When you think about living out our faith now in light of the coming wrath of God, it doesn't feel, the word suddenly doesn't come to mind. It's like, is it ever going to get here? When is it going to happen? We're longing for that day. We look forward to being free from sin and living in paradise apart from sin. But for people who do not believe in a creator and don't believe in the wrath of God and how God feels about sin, it will come suddenly. They'll just be living their lives, marrying and working and going about their day, and just like in the days of Noah, and the flood will come and it'll sweep them away. This is what living by faith looks like. These are the beliefs accompanied with Christians, with people who live with faith. And so we don't want to downplay the wrath of God. We want to be honest about the wrath of God. We don't want to downplay how God feels about sin. We don't want to downplay how Jesus feels about sin, because we want to be Christ-like. And we know how he felt about it. So in this era of faith that we live in, we need to have faith like Noah. We need to get to work. We need to endure. We need to trust. We need to obey. And I think faith today is even more impressive in the sense that we get to invite people into the ark, that is Christ. We need to spread the gospel message and invite people to the ark of Christ, the one way of salvation, because Christ has prepared a place for those with faith. He has prepared a place for us through his righteous life and through his atoning death on the cross. Sin will not go unpunished because we have faith that our sins were punished on Jesus. They were atoned for through Christ. He paid for our sin. He paid our debt. And we know that this broken, messed up world does not get the final say. Our Creator does. And when he is finished with his wrath, when he is finished with judgment, it will be as he intended free from sin. So right now we need to live with faith like Abel. We need to live with faith like Enoch. And let's have faith like Noah to endure, to trust, and obey. Let's pray.